Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are really embarking on a very focused and I think deeply insightful mission. We're taking a close look at a foundational essay, one that details the major prophecies in the book of Daniel. And this is really for anyone who wants to understand this scriptural map of history, not as, a bunch of riddles, but as a genuine anchor for the soul.
It's exactly that. It's an anchor. I mean, you're doing a deep dive into what is essentially the revealed future. Daniel's book is just so unique because it stands, as the essay puts it, right at the crossroads of history and hope. You've got this young man, Daniel, an exile in Babylon, which was the heart of world power. And yet God puts him right there, inside the machinery of empire.
Right in the middle of it.
To bear witness to one single overarching truth, that heaven rules.
And that emphasis on sovereignty is, I think, immediately crucial. These aren't just fascinating historical predictions. The essay calls them anchors for the faithful.
Yeah.
They offer stability, right? Because they show God's purposes are guaranteed, even when his people feel completely powerless or lost in exile.
Absolutely. And if we're going to frame the mission for today's deep dive, it's really to clarify that this revelation in Daniel it's intensely practical. It tells us where history is going so that we can live faithfully today.
And it's not just an Old Testament thing, is it? It's completely bound to the New Testament. I mean, Jesus himself validates Daniel, connecting his words directly to the events right before his own appearing. He urges his readers, and by extension you, our listener, to understand what you're seeing.
He does. And if you synthesize the core theme, Daniel's visions really trace three interwoven paths. You've got the arc of Gentile rule world history.
Yeah.
You have the path of Israel's discipline and its ultimate restoration. And then you have the certainty that the Son of Man will receive a kingdom that will never, ever pass away.
So understanding Daniel lets us look at history, even the struggles, with a kind of settled hope instead of panic.
That's the goal, a settled hope. Jesus spoke of Jerusalem being trampled on by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Daniel gives us the map to navigate that with confidence.
That sets the perfect foundation. So our aim today is for a serious, but also warm and pastoral clarity, helping us move past the maybe confusing parts of prophecy to really grasp the meaning. Okay, so let's unpack this historical background, because context here is absolutely everything. Daniel's story kicks off around 586 BC. A devastating year. It's the fall of Jerusalem to Babylon. So what was the long-term consequence of that event? What did it set in motion?
Well, the fall of Jerusalem was a cataclysmic turning point for God's people. I mean, truly cataclysmic. It was the moment the Davidic covenant, the line of kings, was just violently interrupted. And crucially, the essay stresses that this event kicked off what Jesus would later call the times of the Gentiles.
The times of the Gentiles.
Yes. A long season, an entire era where foreign, non-Jewish powers would rule the land. The city of Jerusalem itself would be trampled on, and that condition was destined to last until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Daniel was living right at the painful, traumatic beginning of this new era.
And it's so striking that he had to operate not just under this new rule, but right inside its government. How did he manage that dual loyalty? He's in the Chaldean court, the belly of the beast, but stays faithful.
That dual loyalty is maybe the greatest practical lesson in the whole book. Daniel and his friends, they were chosen because they were the best and the brightest. They were forced to learn the language, the literature, the customs of Babylon. And yet his loyalty to God remained absolutely strict, uncompromising. You see it right at the start.
Yeah.
He refuses the king's rich food and wine. And that wasn't just about diet. It was about maintaining his ritual purity, his integrity, when faced with overwhelming cultural pressure.
So his faithfulness was really established in those small choices first, long before the big life or death crisis.
Precisely. And his deepest loyalty was revealed in his quiet, established habits. Praying 3 times a day, with his windows open toward a ruined Jerusalem.
Wow.
He confessed that all wisdom belongs to God alone, who reveals mysteries, not the pagan gods or the court astrologers. His life just shows that profound faithfulness is not only possible, but is maybe most visible when you're serving under regimes that don't share your faith, or are even hostile to it.
This must have been such a crushing time, not just politically, but theologically, for the exiles. They weren't just lamenting a military defeat. They were facing huge questions about God's character.
They absolutely were. The exiles shattered their identity. It raised massive theological questions that demanded a divine answer. Just think about it for a second. God had promised Abraham a land and a blessing. Now the land was in ruins. And even more painfully, you have the unconditional covenant with David. God promised an everlasting kingdom, that a son of David would never be lacking on the throne.
And now there was no one.
No one. The throne was empty. The entire foundation of their national hope seemed completely shattered.
So when God gives Daniel these vast prophecies, the statue, the beasts, the timetable, he is directly answering that question. Has God forgotten us? Is the promise broken?
That is exactly the point. The prophecies chart the rise and fall of these Gentile empires, but they all point to one conclusion. God will replace man's temporary rule with his own eternal kingdom. He shows them the final chapter to sustain their faith through the dark middle part.
And the solution isn't some kind of human reform.
No, it's the stone not cut by human hands. It shatters the entire statue of human glory and power, the gold, the silver, the bronze, the iron. It all gives way to a divine kingdom that fills the whole earth. The solution has to be divine intervention.
This background gives Daniel's prayer in chapter 9 this incredible urgency. He wasn't just asking for comfort.
No, not at all. His prayer was direct response to Scripture. He was reading Jeremiah's prophecy that the exile would last exactly 70 years, and he was doing the math. So he turns to God immediately with confession, with petition. And the way he prays is so instructive. It's based entirely on God's name and covenant, not on Israel's merit.
And the answer he got went so far beyond just those 70 years of captivity.
Oh, it leaped over the immediate future and laid out a longer program. It moved from the end of the Babylonian exile to the end of history itself. The answer was about the 77s, which covers the complete resolution of Israel's sin, bringing in everlasting righteousness and the full restoration of the holy city, all in God's perfect, fixed time. It's God confirming to a broken people, I have a timetable, and that timetable guarantees I will fulfill my promises.
Okay, so if we shift into the biblical narrative itself, the essay points out that Daniel uses these two major images, the statue and then the four beasts, to describe this sequence of Gentile powers.
Yes, and they work together to provide this fixed framework that all culminates in the Messianic kingdom.
All right, let's delve into that famous statue image from Daniel 2, because it really is the ultimate high-level map of history. It's one single image, but the materials, they progress from the head down to the feet, and they show a clear decline in quality, right? But an increase in sort of political strength.
That progression is absolutely key. The vision moves from the splendor of a single absolute monarchy down into an increasingly fragmented and brutal kind of rule.
So let's start at the top. Gold.
The head of gold was Babylon. Gold symbolizes majesty, ultimate centralized authority, incredible wealth. You think of Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance, his absolute power. He saw himself as basically divine.
Okay. And then came the silver, which replaced the gold.
The chest and arms of silver represented Medo-Persia. And silver, being less precious, suggests a decline in that singular royal glory. And notice it's the chest and arms which implies a dual nature, the Medes and the Persians. The Persians eventually become the stronger arm. This empire was, militarily bigger than Babylon, but it lacked that same golden majesty. We see this duality confirmed later in the book, too.
And moving down to bronze.
Below that, you have the belly and thighs of bronze, which is Greece. And bronze, while even less valuable, was practically superior in military terms. It suggests rapid conquest, superior weaponry. This really anticipates the incredible swiftness of Alexander the Great's empire.
And then, the most physically crushing power of all, iron.
The legs of iron represented the fourth kingdom, Rome. Iron is strong. It's crushing. It unifies by force. It's capable of breaking anything in its path. This power imposed law, infrastructure, military might across the known world. And Rome, of course, was the power reigning when the Messiah first appeared.
But the vision doesn't end there. With pure strength, it goes down to the feet. And we get this strange, unstable combination, the feet of iron and clay. What does that brittle mixture tell us about the final form of Gentile rule?
This is one of the most critical insights into the end times. The mixture implies that the final stage of human power inherits that crushing strength of iron, but it's inherently unstable. It's mixed with clay, which the text says will not adhere to one another.
So it can't hold together.
It can't. It suggests a form of government with real fragility, maybe an uneasy coalition of strong autocratic powers mixed with weaker popular elements. They're always trying to unify, but fundamentally failing to stick together. It's human ambition trying and failing to create unity.
And the climax, the stone, it doesn't just, evolve from the feet.
Not at all. The vision culminates in a definitive, catastrophic, divine intervention. The stone is not cut by human hands. That means it's supernatural. It's from God. And this stone strikes the statue right at the feet, shattering that final form of Gentile rule. But in doing so, the whole statue, gold, silver, bronze, and iron, collapses into dust at the same time.
What does that shattering of all of them at once tell us?
It tells us that every form of human government, from Babylon's glory to Rome's crushing law and that final fragmented stage, they all share the same fixed, catastrophic end. The final kingdom doesn't come from reform. It arises from sudden, decisive judgment. And then that stone grows into a mountain that fills the whole earth. This mountain is God's eternal kingdom, established permanently outside the failed cycle of human politics.
Okay, so this statue showed history through the eyes of man, impressive, valuable materials. But then Daniel's own visions in chapter 7 use these images of terrifying, ravenous beasts rising from a chaotic sea. What new dimension does this add, especially about the moral character of these same empires?
You're right, Chapter 7 confirms the same sequence of empires, but it shifts the focus entirely to their moral character and their antagonism toward God. The chaotic sea often symbolizes the turbulence of the nations, where this Gentile power comes from. The beasts, a lion, a bear, a leopard, and a fourth terrifying beast. They represent the exact same four powers, but the imagery is so much darker.
Let's look at the first three, because the details are so precise.
Okay, take the first beast, the lion with eagle's wings. This is Babylon, the king of beasts, symbolizing power and majesty. The wings suggest the swiftness of Nebuchadnezzar's conquests, but then significantly the wings are plucked, and it's made to stand up on 2 feet like a man. This is a direct reference back to Daniel 4, where Nebuchadnezzar was humbled, driven mad, and then restored to know that heaven rules. The lion's majesty is stripped away, and it's given a human heart, a recognition of the limits of even the greatest king.
Then the bear, raised up on one side with 3 ribs in its mouth.
The bear is Medo-Persia. It perfectly captures the duality and the unequal nature of that empire. It was raised up on one side because Persia became the stronger partner. The 3 ribs likely represent its 3 major conquests: Lydia, Babylon, and Egypt. The whole image is one of brute, hungry conquests.
And the third one, the leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads.
A perfect symbol for Greece. The 4 wings emphasize the unbelievable swiftness of Alexander the Great's conquests. He covered ground faster than any army before him, but the empire doesn't last. The 4 heads show the division of the empire right after Alexander's death. It fractured into 4 successor kingdoms. It's an incredibly precise prediction.
Then we get to the fourth beast, which is, it's just terrifying. Iron teeth, 10 horns, it's like nothing on earth.
Exactly. This 4th beast, corresponding to the legs of iron, is too powerful and diverse to be named. It represents the crushing militaristic strength of Rome and that final form of Gentile power. Its power is summarized by the 10 horns, which represent the 10 kings or realms that make up its final configuration.
And from those horns springs the infamous and absolutely crucial figure, the little horn.
Yes, this is the ultimate antagonist. The little horn rises up among the 10, and it uproots 3 other horns to consolidate its power. And the description of his actions is chilling. It's our clearest profile of the figure we often identify as the Antichrist. He speaks boastful words against the Most High, he sets himself against God, changes times and laws, and he relentlessly wages war against the saints. This conflict defines the very end of the Gentile era.
And this raging conflict isn't resolved by some human revolution. The scene shifts to heaven.
It does. While the little horn is raging on earth, the vision cuts dramatically to the heavenly courtroom. The judgment is set, the thrones are placed, and the sovereign, eternal God, the Ancient of Days, takes his place. Judgment is executed, and the little horn's power is stripped away.
And after that judgment, we get this climactic introduction of the Messianic King.
Precisely. Right after the judgment, we see one like a son of man coming with the clouds of heaven. This figure is brought before the Ancient of Days and receives dominion, glory, and an everlasting kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages will serve. This is the moment history has been marching toward.
And that title, Son of Man, becomes so profound because we know Jesus adopted it for himself.
Absolutely. Jesus used this self-designation constantly, explicitly binding Daniel's prophecy to his own destiny, especially his future role as judge and king. Daniel clarifies that this figure isn't just a human king, but a divinely appointed eternal ruler.
And the final promise for the saints who endured all that persecution is, well, it's a stunning reversal.
It is. The interpretation confirms their suffering is temporary, but their victory is permanent. The saints will receive justice, and they will possess the kingdom under the whole heaven forever and ever. Their suffering is just the prelude to their reign.
Before we leave this, I want to briefly connect chapter 8, which really zeroes in on the ram and the goat.
Yes, chapter 8 gives us this additional hyper-specific confirmation about the second and third empires. Medo-Persia is the ram and Greece is the goat. The chapter even details how the Greek Empire will produce a king who profanes the holy place, which foreshadows Antiochus IV Epiphanes, a historical type of the ultimate Antichrist. It just demonstrates conclusively that God names empires and sets their lifespan before they even exist. He's guarding his people and his promises.
Okay, let's move to Daniel 9. This is arguably the most detailed and maybe the most complex piece of prophecy in the whole book. This vision isn't about general empires. It's a precise timetable, decreed specifically for Daniel's people and the holy city. Before we get into the timeline itself, what are the 6 specific staggering goals God set for this period of 77s?
Understanding these goals is foundational. They establish the purpose of the 490 years or 70 weeks of years. There are 6 divine objectives that have to be accomplished for Israel and Jerusalem before this prophecy is complete. 1. To finish transgression. 2. To put an end to sin. 3. To atone for wickedness.
Okay, just those first 3, they show this can't just be about the return from Babylon. This is messianic work.
Absolutely. The return from Babylon didn't put an end to sin. Only Christ's atoning work can do that. So the prophecy has to extend far beyond Daniel's own time. The last 3 goals are just as huge. 4. To bring in everlasting righteousness. 5. To seal up vision and prophecy. And 6. To anoint the most holy place.
So how does Daniel break down this 490-year period? It's broken into distinct sections, which is where the careful chronology starts.
The 490 years are divided into 3 parts. The first segment is 7 sevens, or 49 years. This is the time for rebuilding the city, with plaza and moat in troubled times, so the restoration of Jerusalem.
And the second part.
That is 62 sevens, or 434 years. So you have 7 plus 62, which is 69 weeks, or 483 years. And this entire period is timed to run from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the Anointed One, the Messiah, comes.
And can we anchor that starting point? Which decree are we talking about?
Well, the most compelling starting point is the decree from Artaxerxes in 445 BC, which we read about in Nehemiah. It specifically authorized rebuilding the city, not just the temple. And if you trace 483 years forward from that date, adjusting for the calendars, it lands you remarkably close to the time of Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, the moment he was publicly presented as Messiah.
That is incredible precision. And what happens right at the end of that 69-week period?
The text says the Anointed One, the Messiah, is cut off and has nothing. This is a clear foretelling of his rejection and his crucifixion. He arrived exactly on schedule and he was rejected. And then right after this, the prophecy adds that the city and the sanctuary will be destroyed by the people of a coming ruler.
Which we know historically points to the Roman army destroying Jerusalem and the temple in 70 AD.
Yeah.
But here's the critical question. Where is that final 7-year period, the 70th week? The destruction happened in 70 AD, but those 6 huge goals are not yet complete.
That is the essential complexity of Daniel 9. The destruction in 70 AD is a huge historical marker, but the goals of Daniel 9.24 are still outstanding. This requires us to understand that there is a prophetic gap, or a parenthesis, between the 69th week and the 70th week. The clock, in a sense, pauses.
And that gap, that pause in the prophetic clock, focused on Israel, that is filled by the current era, the church age.
That's right. This gap allows for the fulfillment of the mystery revealed in the New Testament, the calling out of the church, a new people of God made of both Jew and Gentile. This is the period we're in now where the gospel is going to the nations. It matches Paul's description of Israel's partial hardening until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. God's focus is currently on the church, but that clock for Israel will restart.
So let's zero in on that final 7 years, the 70th week. What defines this ultimate period?
The final 7 years centers entirely on the actions of a specific powerful ruler. This ruler, the ultimate prince who is to come, he confirms a covenant with many, likely Israel, but then he violently breaks it right in the middle after 3.5 years. At that midpoint, he stops the sacrifice and offering, and he sets up the abomination of desolation.
The abomination of desolation, that's a highly charged term. What does it signify?
It signifies a definitive public act of supreme profanity against the holy place. It's the ultimate blasphemy. And this is the exact sign Jesus told his disciples to watch for. He said, when you see it, the distress that follows will be unparalleled in all of history. It's the unmistakable marker that the final, intense period of tribulation, the last 3.5 years, has begun.
The harmony between Daniel and the New Testament, especially on the timing, becomes just overwhelming here.
It really does. Daniel's timeline is the scaffolding for everything else.
Huh.
Paul tells us all Israel will be saved after the fullness of the Gentiles, which aligns perfectly with the restart of the 70th week. And then Revelation picks up Daniel's exact durations for this final period, the 42 months, the times, and half a time. It's all 3.5 years, confirming the intense but short duration of that final conflict. The end is conquest, not chaos, because the timeline is fixed.
So this leads us to the broader theological significance of all this. It seems like the central point, the one that runs through the whole book, has to be the absolute sovereignty of God. How does the sheer detail here enforce that reality?
The detail strips away any illusion of human control. I mean, God names empires in advance. Medo-Persia and Greece are called out centuries before they act. He sets absolute boundaries on the pride of kings, like we see so vividly with Nebuchadnezzar. Daniel's prophecies just demand that we see every earthly throne, every political system, every human boast as just, borrowed power, measured against the ultimate authority of the Ancient of Days.
So the true axis of history isn't human plans or political maneuverings.
No. The true axis of history is defined by divine decree and nothing else. We're being shown a fixed plot, the stone will strike, the Son of Man will receive the kingdom, and that dominion will not pass away. That certainty is the source of all our hope. And that's why Jesus commands us to understand Daniel. It's a map to steady our faith in turbulent times.
This brings us back to that distinction between God's plan for Israel and his plan for the church. It can be a challenging point. Daniel 9 is decreed for your people and your holy city. Why is keeping that distinction clear so crucial for understanding this prophecy?
It provides essential clarity. It prevents us from misinterpreting how these things are fulfilled. We have to affirm that the 77s are decreed for the physical nation of Israel and the city of Jerusalem specifically. Those 6 goals ending sin, bringing in righteousness, are specific to God's covenant relationship with Israel.
And how does that contrast with the church?
The church, Jew and Gentile made into one new man, is revealed later as a mystery. This church age is God's current program, where he is gathering a people from all nations. The church was not the explicit subject of Daniel's 490-year timing program. That program is on pause while the church is being built.
And if we collapse those two ideas, Israel and the church, into just one group, what's the risk?
Well, the risk is twofold. First, you obscure the clarity of the prophetic timeline, because you lose the reason for that gap after the 69th week. Second, and maybe more importantly, you risk undermining God's faithfulness to his specific physical promises. God's plan for the church doesn't cancel his covenant with Israel. He keeps every promise he made to the fathers of Israel because his gifts and his call are irrevocable. Honoring this distinction honors God's character as a promise keeper.
So this is about progressive revelation. The New Testament doesn't abandon the Old Testament promises.
Exactly. The later light of the New Testament brings the older words into sharper focus. It doesn't nullify them. The monumental images we've talked about, the stone, the Son of Man, the Anointed One cut off, they all point perfectly to Jesus Christ. He is the unified fulfillment of all the ancient hopes for the church today and for Israel tomorrow.
Because these time markers are so detailed, they naturally attract a lot of scrutiny and sometimes some unfortunate errors. How does the structure of Daniel's prophecy give us a necessary guardrail against certain prophetic mistakes?
You're right. Daniel's reliability calls us to a necessary humility, and it guards against 2 key errors. The first one is what you could call collapsing prophecy. This is trying to spiritualize or push all prophecy into the past, arguing it was all fulfilled by Christ's first coming or in 70 AD. That approach just leaves us with general comfort, and it negates the specific future hope for Israel and Christ's physical reigning kingdom.
And the second error, the one that's maybe more common in our time.
That's the temptation toward drawing exact charts, trying to set precise dates and times that the Bible explicitly tells us not to set. And when that date setting fails, as it always does, it leads to massive disappointment, disillusionment, and it discredits the reliable nature of Scripture. God's revelation is meant to produce holiness and expectation, not a calendar.
So we need a posture that balances confidence in the what with humility about the when.
That's the balance perfectly. Daniel calls us to clear confidence in what God has said, that the kingdom is coming, and humble patience where he has not revealed the precise timing. The staggering comfort is this: the same Lord who was cut off at the exact appointed time will absolutely return at the appointed time to finish those 6 goals. Our faith is fixed on God's fidelity to his timeline.
So the prophecy gives us this sweeping cosmic picture, the fixed map of history. But the crucial question is always, how does this vision change our daily lives today? The essay points out that Daniel's courage wasn't some theatrical stunt, it was purely devotional. So what practices sustained him that we, living in our own kind of exile, can apply?
Daniel's courage was entirely the predictable outcome of his established, quiet, devotional habits. We see him in Daniel 6, opening his windows toward Jerusalem, praying 3 times a day. This was not a casual practice. It was a visible, risky act of defiance. So when the crisis came, the decree that could cost him his life in the lion's den, he didn't have to invent some new act of spiritual resistance. He simply maintained the pattern of faith that was already formed in him.
That's a profound principle. Faithfulness in consistency is what builds resistance to crisis. The test just reveals the existing pattern.
Exactly. In a world of rising and falling kingdoms, Daniel calls us to the same steady habits. Seeking God's face, confessing sin, appealing to his name and his covenant promises, never relying on our own merit. Prayer is the spiritual habit of exile life. It's the practice of acknowledging that heaven rules, even when we feel like captives.
And how should this prophetic knowledge change our emotional investment in the kingdoms of men? What happens when the political or global headlines cause genuine anxiety about the future?
We anchor ourselves in the core truth that Daniel forced the greatest king on earth to acknowledge. The Most High rules over the kingdoms of men and gives them to whom he pleases. That changes everything. It means our response to anxiety isn't panic or despair or some feverish political activity that consumes our peace. Our proper response is laying our requests before him with thanksgiving. That's the mechanism that guards our hearts and minds with a peace that, transcends circumstances. We work diligently, but we don't panic. We know the final outcome isn't up for a vote.
Daniel also gives us a blueprint for serving competently within systems that are secular or even hostile to our faith.
He does. He served pagan kings with exceptional excellence and diligence, without ever surrendering his ultimate loyalty to God. This is such a vital lesson for a believer in the modern workplace or community. Faithfulness in the small things, doing excellent work, maintaining integrity that honors the Lord just as much as the big headline moments. We're called to be exemplary servants in Babylon, not just critics of it.
And that ultimate model of resistance through settled hope, it comes from Daniel's 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Their refusal to bow is the very definition of settled hope. When they were faced with the furnace, they declared, "The God we serve is able to deliver us." And then, crucially, they added the ultimate condition. But even if he chose not to deliver us, we would still not serve your gods.
That even if, that's the moment the gospel becomes credible.
It is. That's the posture required of believers in every age when the pressure mounts to conform. Their settled, unwavering hope makes the gospel credible, even when the powers of this world sneer at our convictions. We live differently, not because we're trying to win, but because we already know the King who reigns. It's the antidote to being conformed to the pattern of this world.
So if we accept this vast, sovereign framework, knowing that a divine kingdom is coming and that the Son of Man will reign, how does that big picture shape our practical mission today?
It radically focuses our energy. It clarifies our mandate. Jesus commissioned us to preach repentance for the forgiveness of sins to all nations, empowered by the Holy Spirit.
So we aren't tasked with political revolution or with building the final kingdom ourselves.
No. We do not build the stone, we announce the king. We aren't called to set dates or chart every minor geopolitical event. We are called to live ready, occupying until he comes. Our confidence is in his sovereignty, not our success in decoding every headline.
And that framework naturally requires us to hold a kind of complex, dual focus in our love and our attention.
Yes, that dual focus is essential. We're called to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, the city and people, Daniel's prophecy concerns, without ever despising the nations. And conversely, we're commanded to love and serve the Gentile nations, our current missionary focus, without ever forgetting Zion and God's irrevocable promises.
Therefore, our labor today, whether it's missionary or familial or professional, it has confidence built right into it, regardless of the apparent success or failure we see.
Absolute confidence. When we see global events that echo Daniel's words, arrogant rulers, geopolitical tension, we should not tremble like those without hope. Instead, we should lift our heads and strengthen weak hands because our redemption is drawing near. Daniel's prophecy confirms the ultimate success of God's plan, guaranteeing that our labor in the Lord is not in vain. The map shows the certainty of the destination, and that motivates our faithfulness on the journey.
This has been a deeply clarifying and, I think, essential deep dive into the book of Daniel. We've seen how these major prophecies provide this inescapable, precise framework for history that leads inexorably to a single person, the king who comes with the clouds and receives everlasting dominion.
The overarching conclusion, which is confirmed by both the statue and the beasts, is that the end of history is not a depressing cycle of endless regimes. The end is conquest, it's judgment and triumph. It is the kingdom, the stone that shatters all rivals, the mountain that fills the earth, and the certainty that the saints will possess that kingdom forever and ever.
And that certainty, revealed centuries ago, is the powerful anchor that we need for endurance today.
I hope you'll take these revealed truths to heart. We're called to pray with Daniel's devotion, to trust with his confidence, and to fix our eyes where he fixed his comments on the God who reveals mysteries and keeps his covenant. As we live in the light of this final guaranteed victory, the scriptures offer this profound encouragement. Blessed is the one who waits for and reaches the end. And this blessing isn't for those who decode everything perfectly, but for those whose patient faith is sustained by knowing that the one we wait for is faithful and near. Remember this unwavering promise, which really summarizes the entire prophetic framework and should define your hope. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. The kingdoms of this world are always interim, they're temporary, and they're frail. The kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah is forever. May you be blessed with settled confidence and holy patience as you live in the light of his eternal promise.